Welcome to WorldBox. A game I've been playing recently with the whole goal of becoming a god or playing as a god. You develop your own world, you build races, you build civilizations, and you can watch them interact with each other, be it through war, diplomacy, or other means. Now recently WorldBox received a pretty large update called the Megabox update. It added a bunch of different stuff, and I figured it was big enough to create a video on WorldBox finally. I've been playing for a few months now, and it is a very fun game. Now this video is all about an experiment that I've kind of had around in my head for a few weeks, and I just wanted to see how it would work out. Specifically, I wanted to see how a world would develop if I left it for a very long period of time. Now generally most of my worlds do not last very long, probably up to about the 200-year mark. But in this video, I want to see how long I can run a world. And I want to see how two different races develop in that. My current prediction is that the two races will eventually go down to one. They'll obviously eliminate each other at some point, but I want to see how the different cultures interact, how they grow, and how the different kind of factions splinter, because that is a big part of this game, and I would like to see how that develops across the path of thousands of years. So if we go to our world generator down here, I'm going to generate a planet. I think I'm going to go with a big continent planet. I'm going to keep it at the standard size for speed and performance purposes. I plan on running this experiment for 4,000 years, probably checking in every 1,000 years. As for settings, I plan on leaving everything at its base values, other than the remove mountains, which I think I'm going to remove all the mountains from the world, just because it gives them a lot more land to work with. And I'm also going to change round edges to square edges. And then we will generate our world. Our world has just finished generating, and I have paused time. So if we look at it, we've got a kind of a diversity of biomes. If we look up here, we've got a little tiny swamp. We've got greenlands. This looks like an enchanted forest up here. We've got a big taiga, a frozen biome in the middle. And then down here we have a tiny, tiny savanna with a little bit of marshland. That's what this kind of mushroom biome is all about. And I think this will do perfectly. We can set up one of the races up here and one down here. Now, importantly, I will be changing around some of the world laws for this experiment. I'm keeping hunger and old age on, because this will obviously make the experiment a little bit better. Of course, civilization babies, armies are important, and I think I'm going to disable the biome overgrowth so that our world mostly stays the same. I'm also going to turn off natural disasters, because those can vastly deform the terrain, though this would lead to a slightly better outcome. So, on the other hand, I will keep it on, but I will turn off erosion. For character races, we have 4 choices. Humans, elves, orcs, and dwarves. I think I'm going to go with elves and dwarves, just because the humans generally don't like anyone, and the orcs and elves do not like each other either. They are naturally kind of predestined for war. So, I'm going to spawn 10 elves up in the enchanted forest, just like that. And then I'm going to go to the other side down here, in the kind of mushroom biome and the frost, and spawn 10 dwarves, and then we will just kind of let it run for the first 1,000 years. It is currently year 203 in the Age of the Sun, and it looks as though the elves have taken out the dwarves very rapidly and have taken over the world. It seems that the OLS faction of elves have rapidly taken over the world in the last 200 years. I believe they wiped out the dwarves pretty quickly in just the first 50 years. I do want to take a look at some of their faction traits just to get a quick update. So let's take a look. Let's look at their king, King Safari. He has been alive since the start of our civilization. He has a silver accessory, some bronze gear as well. He does still have a wooden weapon, which is kind of interesting. He has a golden tooth, poison immunity, he is wise, and a moonchild. So overall, he's actually a pretty good king. As you can see, he's got 26 diplomacy. Let's see the culture tab next. The elves follow the Massa culture. It is the original culture that they started with, which makes sense. It is level 31, and they've developed a lot of trading technologies, I would say. They've got trading boats, transport boats. They also have just kind of some general stuff like statues. They have windmills, obviously, to produce food. They've got different materials for building. It's actually very interesting. Now I want to look at the clan list. There should not be too many clans, but, oh yeah, as you can see, there's only one clan, and it seems to be the ruling clan led by Safari, their king. It is a level 4 clan, and it's been around for about 200 years, which makes sense. Now I want to take a look at the kingdom itself. So if we scroll in, we can see that they've got a few windmills in the kind of snowy biome. Actually, most of their windmills are on like the edge of the snowy biome, though they do have one up here. They've kind of got ports scattered across the planet as well, though. If we look at it, they've got port down here, port up here. I find that very interesting because if you look at the time-lapse, we've seen them kind of popping back and forth, probably transporting materials. A final thing I wanted to note was the fact that they've kind of completely ignored this island. There have been a few wild mages that have appeared up here, but I think it's primarily because this seems like a haunted biome or something, and they just seem to be ignoring it completely. But with that said, I think we'll let this run for at least another 300 years and see if anything major happens. So I figured this was an opportune time to pause. If we pull up our UI, we can see that it's year 441, not quite year 400 in the Age of Dark. And as we can see, over the past 250-ish years, there have been a lot of splits and schisms, literally and metaphorically. If we look over here, we can see that a massive earthquake kind of like ripped this whole piece of the map out. But as you can see right now, there is the Oeleus versus the Oahel kingdoms. Oahel just rebelled, as we saw, and I think, like previous rebellions, the Oeleus faction will definitely win this. But with that said, I do want to check out if their king is still alive, and it seems like he is not. King Snorra is the new king. He's been king for about 150 years, which is most of the time we've been running that past time lapse, but all of his gear is quite high level. They're now all in kind of mithril and adamantine gear. He does have the golden tooth, wise, fertile, lustful, and moonchild traits, which are all pretty good traits. They all give him pretty good stats, as you can see, 13 diplomacy, 16 warfare. And I figure it is worth checking out the Ahahel faction. I'm certain that's not how you're supposed to say that, but King Yasuna, he's also in pretty decent gear, mostly mithril though. He does have some adamantine torso armor and a steel weapon, so he's significantly less well equipped than their king, but that's not everything. He does have the wise and moonchild trait, but he is about the same age as the other king. If we go to the various overlays, let's look at the culture layer. It seems that it has schismed off into 3 different cultures. So let's go here. So we have the Ameo culture, which is the second highest level culture, currently in one village. They're actually very similar to our last update of the Massa culture, but they are fairly simple, as you can see. The smallest culture, the Adre, is very simple. It's actually simpler than the Massa culture that we originally saw, like 300 years ago, and they are not doing too great. There's only 30 people who believe in that. And finally, the Massa culture, which has maxed out their research tree. They have every single common knowledge. They also have the Armor Smith, Defense Strategy, Heroes, Offensive Strategy, and Way of Life special rare knowledges. These are actually all pretty decent, especially the way of life one, but I kind of expected perhaps maybe like a more offensive rare knowledge because of the amount of schisms and rebellions they've been dealing with. Since the culture menu decided to fraction off, I want to see if the clans have changed as well. Unfortunately, actually, it doesn't look like they have, but now they are up to 104 total clan members over time. Well, I guess plus 16, so around 120. The clan has been around for 437 years, though. Other than the obvious kind of missing biomes caused by a few recent earthquakes, as well as this kind of big split, I did notice that they did expand to this fiery island, though it doesn't seem to be going too well for them because all their stuff constantly burns. But other than that, I think we can leave this to run for about another 500 years, and then we will see where they are after a millennia. So now we're back on our world after a full 1,000 years, and we are currently in the Age of Hope. The Elves brothers are now gone. We now have the Yas Una of Fire, and as we saw in the time-lapse, a bunch of different factions formed and collapsed. They primarily started off with like fractures from like 1 or 2 villages, and then they eventually split off into kind of bigger insurgencies before taking over the whole kind of mainland. If we look at their king, they have King Ahel. He is age 191, so very old. He has the Weightless, Moonchild, Gluttonous, Skinburns, Wise, and Golden Tooth traits. He's got some very good gear. He's got a steel bow, some adamantine armor, and a mithril necklace. We can also take a look at the clan lair and see that the old clan was replaced with the Maitak clan. And that is kind of to be expected, especially since the last guys kind of collapsed in on themselves. And I assume if we look at the culture layer, actually it has kind of stayed as the Masa culture. And I don't think there's been no changes since we last saw it because they had maxed it out earlier. In terms of geographic change, there are a few more rifts and schisms in the land caused by meteorites, different earthquakes, and that kind of all makes sense. They have redeveloped the Fire Island and now it's all built up. They do have a bunch of armies just kind of settling around as well. I'd also like to say that since this has started, and for the last about 500, maybe 700 years, the kind of mainland has only been able to support about 1,250, probably up to 1,300 people. Also, it seems typically that when they reach about 1,300 or above 1,000 people, they start having splits and schisms where like a portion up here will break off into a faction, and sometimes they even have multiple factions breaking off. But overall, I'm actually very happy with how this turned out. We saw a lot of different schisms, a lot of factions breaking apart. We saw kind of how they developed over a long period of time, and overall I'm very happy with how this kind of experiment turned out. If I decide to repeat this experiment, I think I'm going to put a bigger map for one, and then I'm also going to be developing probably more than 2 races. I would say 2 or 3, or maybe 2 races, but there's a lot more of both so that they don't quite wipe each other out as fast as the dwarves got annihilated. And before we leave off, I just wanted to look at some of the general statistics of the world. So if we go here, we can see that the world age is 1,030. The world population is 1,270. There's about 70 beasts. There's been 18,000 deaths over the 1,030-year lifespan. 520 of those were natural deaths, which means many and a lot of these guys died from supernatural means. There's been 77 deaths from hunger. About 1,000 creatures were eaten. There's just kind of 16,000 other deaths, which I assume are from like natural events, different wars. and other things. If we look down here, the biggest village, Eodo mode, and the most populated village is Eodo mode as well. There are 2 islands, which makes sense, 2 islands. But overall, those are some kind of interesting statistics. Specifically, the house is destroyed, because I was actually kind of surprised with the amount of different kind of wars that they had on this island. Even though it's fairly small, I thought they were going to be fairly homogenous, but in kind of the second half of 500 years, they split off a lot more than I thought they would. But with that said, I hope you all did enjoy, I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.